All right, it is 5:30. I will call this policy committee meeting to order. May we please have a roll call?
Amy Levy,
Here?
Greg Schneider,
Present.
Joanne Winfield.
Present.
All members are present in the boardroom.
Thank you. Is there a motion for approval of the April 6th policy committee meeting minutes?
So
Point of
moved.
order, would you like to approve the agenda first?
Thank you for that. We will. Keep me in line. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
All right,
Sec-
Could we just pause for a minute? You are absolutely welcome to stay. I just wanted to be clear. Okay. So if we could have the roll effect that, yeah, Spencer is going to be absent for this meeting. All right.
The website has Brian listed.
Yeah,
That's the other member.
No, it's Spencer.
It's Greg and Spencer.
Yep. Brian and Spencer got switched in two different ones. One, it got switched to one, but not the other. Don't worry, I've already taken care of it.
On the website too, because it's run on the web.
No,
Yeah.
that's what I mean, I just took care of that.
All right. Thank you so much. Okay. My apologies. I lost track. I believe there is a motion to approve the agenda. I will provide a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right. That motion passes unanimously. Is there a motion to approve the policy committee minutes from the April 6th meeting?
So moved.
All right. Thank you. I will provide a second. Is there any discussion? All right. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, aye. That motion passes unanimously. That brings us to 1E, appointment of vice chair. Mr. Schneider, would you serve as vice chair for the policy committee?
I would be glad to.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so that brings us to policy 2A. Board Member Winfield, feel free if you have a question or input on policy, just let me know and I'll recognize you. Glad to have you here. All right. Our attorney is present. Thank you so much for joining us. Always good to see you. 2A, Policy 377, Interscholastic Athletics and Activities. Board Member Schneider, I will yield the floor to you. Do you have any adjustments or edits?
I have no adjustments or edits.
Okay, and does that include the first 2 pages?
Yes, it does.
All right, perfect. I didn't have any either. So we'll move through it and then approve them together as a bundle, if that's okay with you.
That's fine.
Perfect. All right, so that brings us to 2B, Policy 377, Rule 1, Interscholastic Athletics and Activities, Programs, Rules, and Guidelines. Rule 1, I have in my note that this one was okay to approve. Board Member Schneider, do you have any edits for either page 1 or 2?
I have no edits for it.
Well, look at us. All right. That brings us to Policy 377, Rule 2. We'll take this one page by page. The first thing that I wanted to address is the title. It currently reads as High School Athletics and Activity Code. But if we look at 1A, Roman numeral 1, it says, have a signed athletic code of conduct. So since we are asking students to sign the code of conduct, I think that's what it should be called. So I would suggest that we slightly adjust the name of this policy so it's High School Athletics and Activities Code of Conduct. Are there any objections to that?
But it also does cover, doesn't this also cover grades 6, 7, and 8? Or
So
is
if
this
that,
just the
they
high
have the
school?
separate one out for intermediate.
Okay.
Let me
All right.
scroll down.
I think you're right. That's the next part.
And the athletic code of conduct is specific to athletics. There is not a separate or a similar thing for activities. So there isn't a something that
when you join the chess club that you sign like you do as an athlete. So that's why it's the athletic code of conduct as opposed to trying to title the whole policy because it's athletics and activities, if that makes sense.
But it covers conduct, so are we opposed to having high school athletics and activities code of conduct?
But students who join activities don't go to the athletic code meeting where they would sign that code of conduct. So there's something separate that athletes sign that people in activities don't.
But those in activities are still held to the same
Right.
policy.
They're still held to the same standards and policies as part of so they do sign their by receiving their student guides or student handbooks. That's where these policies will live for those pieces. So, but they don't go through a athletic code meeting like athletes do.
So is there a reason that doesn't happen for activities? Because if they're held to the same information that's included in Policy 377 Rule 2, why is it that we have athletes formally sign off, they go through them, they acknowledge them, and they're accountable, but we don't extend the same opportunity to students participating in activities?
This was part of the conversation in terms of the rules should not be in policy because we handle them slightly differently. These are administrative regs in nature because there are so many nuances. So athletes go through a code meeting where they actually sign a formalized code of conduct. The students who join clubs don't go through that same formalized process. In part, the code of conduct is also a WIA regulation where the WIA doesn't have that extension for clubs and activities. We've chosen to incorporate the same standards for people who are going out for theater as we do for athletes, but we handle those differently. But we put all those pieces within our student handbook, which covers all of the activity portion of these rules.
So since we decided to keep it in policy, I think it's kind of moot that discussing it being in policy because we already made that decision. And I get that it's not a WIAA requirement, but if we are holding our students who participate in activities to the same standards and we outline them in this policy, even though it's not required, are you opposed to having a meeting with students who participate in activity, not you personally, but their advisor, and going through these rules that they are accountable for?
I'm not opposed to, and in fact, approving this, that would be the mechanism by which we would have to ensure. It is just that I think if we're going to do that, then we would have to make an adjustment in terms of that first piece. Having a signed athletic code, we would have to have a parallel mechanism for activities.
You would just have to have a signed athletic and activities code of conduct.
We would have to have a separate activities code of conduct.
No,
piece.
when I don't mean to interrupt you, when Mr. Beard was here, I asked them, where does the activity code of conduct reside? This was back at our March meeting. And he said they just sign the policy. They just print it off and they sign it.
I believe that was for that intermediate, which is why we were putting that as a separate rule.
No, it wasn't intermediate. That policy didn't exist at that point. I asked him, is there a code of, where is the code of conduct that students sign? And he said, and I wish he was here this evening, he said that they signed the policy.
Okay.
Right.
So I guess here's my thing. Do you have hesitancy with it being our standard that the same way Students at the beginning of an athletic season would meet and have their code meeting. Forgive me if that's not the exact name, but with having our activities do the same thing, because my perspective is if that meeting does not happen, then it puts them at a disadvantage, because when do they review what's outlined in this policy to know what they are being held to account for? Like, when does that happen?
No, I agree with you in that approving this policy, we would have to do that. That would have to be an expectation for doing it. I'm just reading it in terms of, and I guess it's under one of the subs, in accordance to WIA standards and so forth. This eligibility rule is specific to athletics because it incorporates the WIA regulations. And so having activities and then also listing WIA, to me, may or may not, just from my perspective, creates a little bit of ambiguity. It's like, I'm not going out for any sports, I'm going out only for theater, but what's this WIA piece that is a part of that in the code? So we talk about signing this, and it's maintained eligibility according to WIA standards, but those don't govern anything outside of athletics.
Okay, so I think there are specific things that are WIAA, and that, in my opinion, would be a simple fix. We would say we're applicable, or
Okay.
applicable for sports,
Okay.
applicable for athletics.
I think that clears that up.
Now, let me just ask you this, because this is a new thing.
Yep.
Would you like to press pause and again, I hate that Mr. Beard isn't here because I think he could provide some valuable context, and consult with him just to give them a heads up that, come fall or come the next activity wave of seasons, that it's the expectation that a meeting is held and people who want to participate in activities come to the same, or they could run it, I don't know. I would like his input if you could do an athletic and activities code meeting.
I would personally say not push pause, and this would be part of the onboarding for the new athletic director coming into the new school year.
Okay. Board Member Schneider, what are your thoughts on this?
I think we go ahead, we've already agreed that we're going to follow the same standards for activities. Let's just make the adjustments here and then move on.
Okay. All right. So is everyone okay with the title adjustment to High School Athletics and Activities Code of Conduct?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
And then for 1A, have assigned Athletic and Activities Code of Conduct. And then the remainder would remain the same. Do you feel it's necessary to specify for the high school level that would be them signing off on Policy 377 Rule 2, and for the intermediate level that would be them signing off on 377 Rule 3? Or if we want to put the Athletic and Activities Code of Conduct applicable to your grade level, is there a preference?
Seeing how this one is Rule 2 is for the high school, I think when we get to Rule 3, we could write a similar copy and paste and put it into, we do have something when we get to Rule 3 about initial eligibility, and I think we could add in a language around signing the code, signing this policy as signing the code of conduct.
Well, let me ask you this, Dr. Kieser, do you know, so like when currently we have an athletics code meeting, do students sign off on policy, hold on. Nope, it would be, okay, so for high school, it'd be 377 Rule 2, and then intermediate, we now have a separate one. So having assigned athletic and activities code of conduct appropriate for your grade level or applicable to your grade level, I think applicable would work. Any objections?
No.
All right. That was a lot. Anything else on page 1?
I have nothing.
Okay. Board Member Schneider, do you have anything on page 2?
I do not.
Okay. The only thing that I have, and it reoccurs, and I'll point it out once we get to it, but under C, Roman numeral I, when it's talking about travel and conduct on trips, it's a little vague. It's the second sentence, and team/activity members shall also return to school via the same mode of transportation unless a parent or legal guardian gives permission via the sign-out sheet. It doesn't say permission for what. And I like for policy to be clear, is anyone opposed to us saying unless a parent or guardian assumes responsibility for the student via the sign-out sheet? So the student, you sign them out, they're in your custody, you determine what happens next.
That makes sense.
Okay. Ms. Shope, did you get that? Do you need me to repeat?
Assumes responsibility for the student doing the sign-out sheet.
Yep, so instead of gives permission, assumes responsibility for the student and then continue with via the sign-out sheet. And this might be an attorney question. Is there a reason, so sometimes in the policy we say parent or guardian, and then sometimes we say parent or legal guardian. I'm fine with either. I defer to you. I just want us to be consistent.
I agree consistency is important, but I do not think there's an intentional difference in those terms.
Okay, so it's not possible to be someone's guardian without being their legal guardian?
It should not be applied that way, no. There
Okay.
should be no difference in application.
So is everyone comfortable with us just being consistent with as it's presented on page 2, I believe that is parent or legal guardian?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
All right, moving, I believe this is page 3. Board Member Schneider, any adjustments?
I have none at this time.
Okay. I just had a quick one. So for capital letter B, prior to the start, so if we jump down to the end of line 3, Director of Athletics and Activity, and that one should be or designee, to review and sign acknowledgement of activity code. That seems a little redundant to me. If you sign it, you're acknowledging it. Does anyone object to us saying Director of Athletics and Activities to review and sign the activities? I guess we would have to have athletics and activity code of conduct. So we would just omit acknowledgement of. All right, moving on to page 4. Board Member Schneider, any adjustments?
No.
All right, I'm good as well. Page 5, same question?
No.
I'm good. Page 6, anything?
No.
Okay. So Roman numeral 3, lowercase b, athletics and activity. Oh, hold on. Nope. So we have athletic consequence. Oh, my apologies. I couldn't understand my own note. All right. Unless there's something I'm missing, in Roman numeral 3, B and C are the same. So is there a reason we don't just change the header in B to say athletic and activity consequences and just consolidate that?
That would make sense to me.
Unless there's something I'm missing.
I believe the intention was to keep the structure parallel because in some of the type 1 and type 2 violations, there were distinctions between the application for athletics and activities.
Right.
So I believe that was done to keep the structure, but aside from that, I think they are the same.
Which I can respect that. If anyone is married to the structure there, I'm fine with keeping it. If we want to, I'm typically a fan of less words. Board Member Schneider, what is your preference?
Since both of them, basically, the statement is the same, I think we can combine them into one.
Okay, I am absolutely fine with that. So Ms. Schopp, we will omit C and adjust B to athletic and activity consequences. All right, that's all I had for that page. I have lost count of what the next page is. So we will just go to the next page, starting with Student Assistant Program. Board Member Schneider, do you have anything for that page?
I have nothing for that page.
Okay. I have a question, and I think I asked this in March, and forgive me because I don't remember the response, but Roman numeral 2, lowercase letter b, and this is under self-referrals for anyone who's listening at home. Glad to have you. B, should violations occur on school grounds during the school day or during any school activity in the district, students will lose the right to exercise the use of self-referral privileges. So just to refresh everyone's memory, self-referral is if I violated the code and I know I did it, but no one else knows it. So if I self-report, or if a parent, well, it says self or family, so I guess it doesn't have to be parent, reports, then that could minimize the consequences that I would suffer. Okay, so why should that help that make that make sense for me? So if I do something that I'm not supposed to do that is a code violation, because it happens on school grounds, why do I forfeit my right or my ability to self-refer?
So as I remember the conversation that we were having, there were a couple of different scenarios that occurred. So you get caught in an act, let's say smoking in the bathroom or something like that. You're already caught and you're having school disciplines. You then can't self-report yourself in the middle of a school disciplinary event so that you can get less of a consequence on the code side. The other caveat is, we did something that we know we weren't supposed to do, but I know that I'm going to get, someone is going to turn me in, so I'm going to quick turn myself in so that I can get a lesser of a consequence than someone else who didn't turn themselves in. In so doing, sometimes you also end up with school consequences. So it was the mitigating factor that usually a code violation while on school grounds or under the supervision of school authorities is also a code of conduct or code violation within the school policy.
But my only issue with that is that's not the scenario that's being described. A self-referral is an athletic and so it says any type 1 or type 2 code violation that is self or family reported to the director of athletics and activities prior to staff awareness. So it's not I got caught and I want a lesser sentence. Like, nobody knows. I haven't been caught. But what this is saying is that if the thing that I did that no one else knows about happens on school grounds, then I forfeit my ability to self-referral. And that doesn't seem fair to me. So it's not I got caught and I want to lessen it. I didn't get caught.
Right. Well, in each of those situations, so we'll take the smoking in the bathroom scenario, and you didn't get caught, but you suspect that the 3 other individuals that you're in the bathroom with, someone is going to report, or they did get caught, and you know it's a matter of time. You self-report, so you get a lesser sentence. By self-reporting that to the director of activities and athletics that I was smoking in the bathroom, now we have 2 issues. You've got a code violation, and you broke a school code or school rules. So now we have school consequences on top of that.
But here's the thing, in B, the second sentence says students are strongly encouraged to self-report AODA violations. So if it happens at school, you're saying I can't report, but we're encouraged to report. It does not make sense to me, and it contradicts itself. Is there a legal reason why, if a student violated the code on school grounds, is that legal to offer the option of self-reporting, but have that be tied to a location?
I don't know of any legal distinction that's being made there. I assume that's purely a policy decision.
So it's not like like if we're extending this option to students, but we are limiting it based on where the offense happened, there's not an issue with that?
I can't think of one, no.
Okay. Board Member Schneider, does that make sense to you?
Well, I know under A, it says may result in up to 50% reduction. But we could add the words of the athletic activity code suspension
Okay.
and just identify that if there's a reduction, it really has to do with the athletic and activity code, not the school policy.
Not
Two
the
separate
school
things,
consequence.
Right, the school consequence is separate.
Okay. So is there objection? I like that a lot. So up to 50% reduction of the athletic or activity consequence. So if we could change of the normal suspension, if we can change that to of the athletic and or activity consequence. And then I'm not comfortable with keeping that first sentence of B. So Board Member Schneider, I'm interested in hearing your perspective.
Well, with the changes we just made to A, I don't think we need B,
Okay.
or at least the first sentence out of that, because we just made that distinction in A.
Okay. So how about this? If we omit, so we edit A, so swapping out normal suspension to athletic or activity consequence, we omit B, we completely delete that first sentence, and I would say that last sentence, we just move that up to the end of A. Because I think we should encourage students to self-report and to get the assistance they need. Any objections to that?
No.
All right. So Roman numeral 2, self-referral will now have A and B. So C will become B, the first sentence in B is omitted, and that second sentence will be included in A. Anything else for that page?
No.
All right, moving on to the next one. Board Member Schneider, do you have anything for that?
No.
I don't either. The last page.
I have nothing.
You're good? Okay, the only thing that I have is the lowercase Roman numeral 6. The out of season has some extra little apostrophes or tildes there. Apostrophes, not tildes. So if we could remove those. And then I have a question. So policy 377, rule 3, which we're about to review, has a section on sportsmanship, which I really like. And I'm wondering why, is there a reason that section was not included in the high school policy?
So Rule 3, there used to be a simple form that Mr. Beard had shared. And so we took that form from the intermediate and put it into policy. So this upper half, up through 5, was basically a policy version of a simple form that the intermediates had for athletics and activities. And that's where the sportsmanship clause was in there. It more or less was, quote, the code of conduct discipline, but we've since taken that part of Rule 2 and put it into Rule 3 so that the intermediate has a similar process to what the high school goes through.
Okay,
So-
but my question is, Rule 3 has a sportsmanship
Yep.
section. Is there a reason that was omitted from the high school Rule 2?
They were developed completely separate from one another. That's why that's why it's not included. The intermediate took and wrote a sportsmanship because they were talking about sportsmanship in terms of their code, as their code of conduct, not as how the high school's done it. So that's why they're separate. And the only reason why they're separate.
Okay, perfect. So I have a suggestion. Once we get to that, I think it should, I like it very much. I think it should be added into Rule 2, but I do want some adjustments to it. And since we're approving them as a bundle, we have some flexibility. Ms. Shope, hang in there with us so we can kind of go back and forth. All right, so that brings us to 377, Rule 3. Again, for consistency with nomenclature, I recommend that we title this Intermediate School Athletics and Activity Code of Conduct. So it would mirror the title for Rule 2. Are there any objections to that?
No.
All right, perfect. Board Member Schneider, any concerns or edits on that first page?
Not at this time, no.
Okay. So as a parent, I happen to know this with at least one building, but under number 2, academics and attendance, capital letter A, grades will be checked on the second and fourth Wednesday of each month. That happens weekly at least one of the intermediate buildings. So, and again, I want our practice to be in line with our policy. Dr. Kieser, can you explain that discrepancy?
So policy always sets a floor, not a ceiling, and so if we set the expectation of that, and so if a school chooses to go and do it more than that, that would not be a policy violation.
I like that. So I would actually remove the specificity of the second and fourth Wednesday and say grades will be checked at least twice a month. And then that would cover what this says. And if people want to do it more, then that's fine. Are there any objections to removing that specificity of which days of the month the checks happen, and just saying grades will be checked at least twice each month?
No.
Okay.
That would be fine.
All right. So the next sentence, if a student athlete has an F, the student athlete will become ineligible for the following week. So my lingering question is, if they run grade checks on a Monday and I have an F, am I eligible that current week and then the following week I become ineligible? That didn't make sense to me, unless there's something that I'm missing.
So they become ineligible from the time that they have that for that next ensuing 5 days. So for at least that following week. And so the term following is not the very next week, but the next 5 days, 5 school days after they become ineligible.
So that seems very unclear to me because the following week means the following week. It doesn't address the current week. So since that's the spirit of what's going on, if we say if a student athlete has an F, the student will become the student will become ineligible and may regain eligibility after the next grade check. And I'm getting really wordy, so somebody make it sound pretty. But we just need to be clear that if we find out on Monday that you have an F, you're immediately ineligible. So so the student athlete will become immediately ineligible
for a week.
Well, it's not just for a week, it's until, because the next.
For at least a week, I should say.
Well, here's the thing. If we're doing 2 grade checks a month, and let's say that they do 1 grade check and then 2 weeks later they do another one, I'm ineligible until I get that next grade check and I don't have an F.
Right.
So it's not just I'm ineligible until next week and I still have an F, but now I'm magically eligible. So if we reword that, and feel free to jump in, friends, to help, the student athlete will become immediately ineligible and will remain ineligible until a grade check reveals no Fs. But I don't like the wording of that, but that's where I'm going with my thought process.
Student athlete will become ineligible until a subsequent grade check reveals.
Reveals sounds very dramatic.
Yeah. Crescendo.
Board Member Schneider, help us.
Will remain ineligible until the grade check the following week.
No, because I could still have an F on the grade check the following
Well,
week.
But again, then there's the F, and it goes through that process. They remain ineligible until the next grade check the following week.
But
Well-
we don't know that it'll be the following. Okay, so
Right.
we can do this. The student athlete will will immediately become ineligible and will remain ineligible until they receive a grade check with no Fs.
Okay, that sounds good.
I don't love it, but I think it
Works.
gets to
What
it.
about
Yeah, it.
until a grade,
Yes.
until a grade check demonstrates improvement? Is that any better?
I think improve because I could improve but still have and I'm getting in the weeds, so somebody pull me back. But I could go from a 13% to a 40%. That's improvement, but I still have an F. Yeah, it's not my fanciest work, but I think it
That's fine.
it does what it needs to. Now, my question is, do we have grade checks for students participating in activities, or can they have Fs and just go on?
No, if they become ineligible, we've paralleled activities and athletics in this sense, so that if they aren't academically eligible for athletics, they're also not eligible for things like the theater.
But who's doing grade checks? Because my kids are in activities. I hear about during basketball season when grade checks happen. We get emails, you're all clear. But with activities, I've never once heard, and that doesn't mean it's not happening. So I want to be clear about that. I am not aware that grade checks are happening for activities.
One, they should be, and two, that will be something that we'll make sure that we nail down a procedure, because we have one at the high school with Skyward, so we can mirror that at any of our schools.
Okay, so we need to adjust student athletes. So students participating in athletics or activities will become immediately ineligible, and then all of the words. All right. So our running list of things that we need to make sure are included with the onboarding of our new athletic and activities director is that it will be an athletic and activities code meeting. And then also grade checks will be run at least twice a month for athletics and for activities. All right, I think that's great. All right, 3B, lost or damaged equipment must be paid for. So my question is by whom? Because this could say, well, you pay for it, district. So is that by the student's family? I think we just need to be clear.
Right. Should be paid for by the, and I was going to say student athlete, but the student and/or family.
Okay. That okay with you, Board Member Schneider? All right. For similar to how we worded it at the top, unless a parent or legal guardian, so where it says parent/guardian, if we can just be consistent with that verbiage. And then instead of request in person and gives written permission to take all of those words, if we say unless a parent or legal guardian assumes responsibility for the student via the sign-out sheet, because that's what we said earlier. All right. Did you get that, Ms. Shope?
I didn't hear where you went.
Okay, no problem. So number 4, travel and trip conduct, capital letter A, that second line going into the third, unless a parent or legal guardian assumes responsibility for the student via the sign-out sheet. And that would replace request in person and gives written permission to take the athlete home. And then I'm assuming that works for activities as well, if they're somewhere compete. All right, perfect. For 5, sportsmanship, which once we edit, I would recommend that we also include in policy or Rule 2. So starts off with racial comments, taunting, or other derogatory remarks made while involved in, I would take out intermediate because I want to mirror it, made while involved in sports or activities. sports or activity, I would say competition, but you want this to, let's keep it broad because you want this to apply to practice as well. So made while being involved in sports, in a sport or activity will result in very severe consequences. So my note that I put is there a reason this isn't included as like one of the type violations? So we know where to categorize it and we know what the consequence is, because that's just very vague. And one of my concerns is if you're gonna discipline students, I want for us to have a reproducible model and it's consistent.
Yes, and so in the conversation around the sportsmanship, because this was the complete code of conduct discipline code part for the intermediate, we felt that it was vague, but wanted to include the Rule 2 Code of Conduct framework from the high school and put it in here. So we wanted to make number 5 and number 6 one entity. So we were going to take out the severe consequences and actually reference the code of discipline down below. That was going to be...
Okay, so if I'm at an event and I'm using racial slurs,
Yep.
and I'm disciplined for that, which I should be if that's what I'm engaging in, I want to be able to point to parents or legal guardians and say, that's a type 2 violation. And this is the consequence you can expect for that. So my question is there something I'm missing? Because when I look at the violations, for type 2, it has bullying. I think this is along the same line. It's like demeaning, racial slur, et cetera. Is there a reason that is not categorized as a type violation? So either 1, 2, or 3.
It would most appropriately be a type 1 violation because it fits well within the examples, the first one being harassing, taunting, threatening, bullying. So adding this language in terms of sportsmanship and saying, we already have taunting, but saying racial comments or racial or other derogatory remarks, we could add that in the examples under type 1 violations.
Now my hesitancy with that is I think taunting, like if I'm calling someone a jerk, that's different than if I'm using a racial slur with someone. And so I'm actually not comfortable with that being considered a type 1 violation. Board Member Schneider, what are your thoughts on that?
Board Member Levy?
Yeah, go ahead.
So type 1 violation are non-alcohol, tobacco, and other drug-related violations. It's not exclusive because other examples of type 1 violations are things like fighting, forgery, cheating, insubordination, unexcused absences. So having that type 2 are all the alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs.
Perfect.
So that's why I say it's a type 1 because it doesn't fall into those.
So why would that not be a type 3? We have hazing or intimidation. Why would you categorize that, if I'm understanding you correctly, as a type 1 and not a type 3? And before you respond, let me see if I can go back to my page. Oh, we got a lot going on. Because it said very serious consequence. Yep, there it is. Okay, will be with very serious consequences, which again is very vague. And type 3, extremely serious violations. So that seems to be more in line than a type 1, but I'm interested in your perspective.
No, I could see it. I could see racial slurs going in under type 3.
Okay. Board Member Schneider, what are your thoughts?
I think that fits under 3.
Okay. So is there any objection to just being specific in that? Because when you're talking about policy, a vague policy is not very helpful. Okay. So racial comments, taunting, or other derogatory remarks while being involved in a sport or activity will result in a type 3 violation. Am I missing something? And then I think we could omit the rest of that because when you go to type 3, it outlines what the consequences are for that. So will result in a type 3 violation. And so that would replace very severe consequence, which can include ineligibility from any sport for the remainder of the school year or further. And again, when I read that, that's kind of the spirit of type 3 violation. So is everyone okay with that? Now, my other issue, which I think we should omit, it says unsportsmanlike penalties and technical fouls fall under this category. But when we go back to double penalizing, which I think I just coined that, that's not an actual thing. I think we should omit that because that's handled in the game. So if I commit a flagrant foul, that's dealt with in the game. I don't think I should get another consequence after the game. Does anyone feel differently?
No, I agree with you there, but again, if we're looking at activities also, how would that affect activities?
What?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about unsportsmanlike conduct,
Yeah, like a technical foul.
well, a technical foul is going to end up in an activity if there are rules around it. But,
Okay.
you know, if we're talking about unsportsmanlike conduct,
So if we
that's a-
omit it, I think we avoid that
Yeah,
question.
Yep.
But that question is valid. Are you suggesting that we add on to what's, like we omit that, but we include additional language to address what does unsportsmanlike conduct look like in an activity? Is that where you were going?
well, yeah, well, like you said, if it's unsportsmanlike conduct in an activity or in a sport, there's going to be a penalty that results from that.
Right.
But at this point, there's nothing for that same behavior if it happens during an activity.
But if we, let me scroll. So if I'm doing a bad thing in my activity, my advisor could say, you're lying, you're fighting, you're whatever,
sure.
whatever. That would say, that's a type 1 violation.
Right.
And these are the consequences. So I
Okay.
feel comfortable that we've,
Yep.
okay. Are you okay with that, Dr.
Yep.
Kieser?
Yep.
All right. So now that we've made those adjustments to sportsmanship, so just to recap, so racial comments, taunting, or other derogatory remarks made while being involved in a athletic or activity, in a sport or activity, will result in a type 3 violation, and then period.
Correct.
Right.
All right. Okay, now, with the way we adjusted 5, I am recommending that we copy and paste that and make that number 12 in Rule 2. Are there any objections to that?
No.
No.
All right. Board Member Winfield, I just want to check in with you. If at any point you jump in. All right, thank you, sir. Okay, so that...
And I would say any changes we made to Rule 2, we would make similar changes reflected because we basically took the structure of Rule 2 and put it into Rule 3.
Yeah, and I don't have any adjustments for the remainder of that policy. Board Member Schneider, do you have anything?
I do not.
Okay, so I think we're good there. All right, so I am willing to entertain a motion to approve policy 377, rules 1, 2, and 3, to move on to the full board for a first reading.
So moved.
Board Member Lindsay?
Yes.
Real quick.
Yeah.
On the base policy 377, do you need to do anything with your cross-references? It looks like we were removing the rules from the cross-references, and I don't believe we addressed that today.
Thank you so much. Hold on, let me find that sheet. All right, so cross-references, yes, Is there a reason that we're removing 377 Rule 1, Rule 2? Because I would say keep them and then add 377 Rule 3. Am I missing something?
I think that was part of a suggestion to remove this to regulations.
Okay, perfect. All right. So we are not, well, we absolutely can add this information to the athletic and activity handbook. I think having it more places is good. But I would say that we keep 4 cross-references, 377 Rule 1, Rule 2, and then add Rule 3. And then Ms. Shope, could you do corresponding cross-references to the rules? Well, we don't, it looks like we don't have them on the rules. Okay, perfect. Okay, I believe we got a, Mr. Schneider, did you provide the motion?
I did.
All right, I will provide a second. Is there any discussion? All right, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
All right, that motion passes unanimously. That brings us to policy 830, public use of school facilities. Board Member Schneider, do you have any changes on page 1?
I do not.
All right. Level 3, could we omit the word designated unless there's a reason? We don't have to designate Rock County residents. I think your residency designates you, unless there's something I'm missing.
No, that's correct.
Okay, so we will omit designated from level 3, and right under that, that's a repeat. And then we made the decision not to include specific groups. So with A, it would just end with recognized civic youth groups. And then for D, theater companies. And we would be consistent with removing the individual groups. Board Member Schneider, anything for page 2?
No.
All right. So right after that large red section that's slated for omission, there are 2 statements and a couple questions. So one, are both needed? And I'll read them both. So the first is a limited public forum. School facilities will be made available to groups who fit the below criteria without regard to their viewpoint, purpose, or ideological affiliation. And then the second statement, permission for any group or organization to use school facilities shall not indicate the board's approval or sanctioning of the purposes or objectives of such groups or organizations. So my question is, are we fine with just that second statement? But the first one is in green, so that's a new add. So I'm wondering, is there like a legal reason to have that?
So this was part of a discussion that I believe we were having last time we addressed this policy. The legal standard is really what's in green. The second statement is a manner in which the board would separate itself from any particular group that it wishes to not be directly affiliated with. And there was a question raised last time, I believe by you, Board Member Levy, regarding what limit can be placed on what groups
Yep,
are allowed
specifically
to
hate
use
groups.
facilities.
Yes,
Correct.
yep.
So that second statement is one of the ways that we would recommend you separate yourself from any group that might have questionable ideology. But the other way that we had reviewed that you might be able to do that is to add a statement that you can deny access based on reasonable foreseeability of either disruption to school programs or harm to people or property affiliated with the district. So to the extent that that's still a question on your mind, I think that second statement is part of the answer to that. And what I just stated is the other thing that we are comfortable with being legally permissible.
Could you hold on to that? Because when we get to the point about application rejections, I think that would be a good time to have that discussion. So if we move down to the bottom of that page, it says the executive director of business services or designee. Oh, wait, hold on. All right. Actually, I need to kind of jump back and forth to make this make sense. So if we go to the last page, that second paragraph, the second sentence, is that it? Okay. That last sentence of the first page, I think we're gonna have to come back to after we see the next policy. Okay. For the second, the first full paragraph on that last page, the second sentence, this is just a question. It doesn't need to edit policy. The board reserves the right to reject any application or revoke any approved application at any time. And then it continues. But my question is, what is the current practice for the board, not necessarily reviewing the applications, because the board gives the authority to the executive director of business operations or their designee, but just to be aware of what applications are being approved, so we know because right now I have no idea of any applications that are approved. So I don't know how we as a board would be able to exercise what we're saying it's our responsibility to do. Does that make sense? I never see the application, so I don't know if any of them need to be revoked. So Dr. Kieser, what is the process for making the board aware of applications that are received and approved?
Right now, there is no formalized process to make the board aware of the applications. We review those, and then we make the determination of whether or not those applications are going to be approved or denied based on the policy. So because of the way it has operated and saying that it is the business office's responsibility for doing it, that then becomes the responsibility of that office and not bringing it to the board, unless there was something of I can't think of a example off the top of my head where we needed to bring it to the board because there's a very big gray area and wanted to get the board's input on that. But that's what currently happens.
So here's my concern. I'm mildly concerned that this is a responsibility of the board, and we give that authority to the business services, the executive director of business services, which is completely reasonable. But if we never know about any applications where it says the board has the right to, reserves the right, that it's kind of nonsensical to reserve a right for something that you have no idea is happening. Now, in addition, I'm not trying to create extra work for people, et cetera, but okay, let me back up. Where do the applications live?
In the electronic system called School Dude.
Okay, and the board does not have access to School Dude.
Correct.
Board Member Schneider, what are your thoughts?
I agree that if the board reserves the right to reject an application or revoke one, we need to know what
We need to at least have access, and if
Right.
we see that's my thinking, but.
I mean, I think unless the board would want to review all of the applications, I think by giving that responsibility to the business office, which I personally believe is where it resides, the reservation is to say, hey, we're hearing that X, Y, and Z is happening. Is that a thing or is that not a thing? And then we can say, yeah, it is. And then if a board member has that concern, they would raise it to the board president to put it on the agenda and then review the application at that time. I don't think this is something where I think that's the intent of how it is written, is that if the board becomes aware of it and it doesn't have the reservation, there's not a mechanism for the board to simply say, well, we choose not to revoke it and we're superseding your authority. I think that's the intent of the reservation there.
No, and I don't disagree with that. Here's my concern. I don't like for things to be random. I like for things to be intentional. And so for me, a potential medium would be the board has access to the applications, and if a board member wants to review them, go be great. If you have any concerns, like you said, bring it up appropriately to the board, but I'm also not trying to make the review of it a responsibility of the board, because I'm sure that, well, once we get one, the executive director of business services is going to be fully capable of handling that. Does that make sense? So there's that balance. I don't feel comfortable with this verbiage remaining the same and us not having access if you choose to look at, because that just seems incongruent to me. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I understand where you are coming from. I would have to assess exactly what mechanism we would do that, and I would say board docs would be our best venue for doing that, of getting the applications out of School Dude and connected into board docs so that board members would be able to see all of the applications that come through for our facilities.
If you could check into that, I think that might be a really great solution. For example, there is a space in Skyward where all of the receipts are there. And we have access to peruse those, and if anything, it kind of raises a flag for us, then we can bring it. But it's not like a regular agenda item or things that we take time out of our meetings to review, like we would like a committee report, et cetera, but the board has access and they can bring it up if they deem that's necessary. So if we could follow that same model with the applications, then for me, that would resolve this. Board Member Schneider, do you have any different thoughts?
Well, the only thought I had is if we just included the statement that, the Director of Business Services will notify the board of any applications, that there's a conflict or that's subjective, too subjective. So
Right.
You're right. I think just the idea, if we can easily just connect the two in a way.
Okay. So Dr. Kieser, will you look into that to see how feasible that is?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. All right, that brings us to policy 830, rule 1. Board Member Schneider, do you have any issues with anything on page 1?
I do not.
Okay. Now, remember that last sentence on that page that I said we need to go back to? I have it again in my notes. This is very exciting. All right. So capital letter A, general rules. Number 1, statements by district employees relative to facility use applications / permits. Oh, I just moved that. Shall not be construed as commitments of the Board of Education. Now, here's my issue with that. So statements by district employees, the executive director of business services or their designee is a district employee, and they are the decision holder because the board has given them that authority. So that seems incongruent to me, because in that from policy 830, it says the executive director of business services or designee is authorized by the board to approve these applications. But this is saying, the way I'm reading it, is that district employees' comments on applications, they don't have, that doesn't bind the board. But since we've given that authority, it does unless we revoke it.
I read that first line of number 1 to be more global than, so saying any district employee making a statement relative to a facility use application or permit is not binding, meaning a group wants to use that, and let's say there's a coalition of employees who are adamantly opposed, or on the flip side, wanting a certain group to come to the school, and the application for some reason goes in the opposite direction. Just because district employees say, yeah, come on here, we will gladly give you our space and all this and that, they don't have the ability to make those contractual comments. So just because someone says, hey, I talked to so-and-so at this school and they said it was okay, doesn't bind them. It's up to us.
So how about this? Statement by district employees other than the executive director of business or their designee. Okay. Statements by district facilities relative to facility use application / permit, and then we include it. So other than the ED of business or their designee shall not be construed as commitments of the board, because the ED of business or their designee can make commitments on behalf of the board. All right,
Yep.
that cleans that up. Ms. Shope, I was confusing in my language. Did you get that?
If you could repeat it, that
Absolutely. So statements by district employees relative to facilities use application / permit other than the executive director of business services or their designee shall not be construed as commitments of the Board of Education.
Thank you.
Perfect. All right, that cleans that up. So the rest of number 1 seems like it's redundant from what's already in policy 830. Is there a reason that information that starts with the board and the executive director and ends with inclement weather is repeated in Rule 1?
Not if, since we're going to keep these all in policy and not have them in 2 separate areas, it is redundant because they'll reference back to one another. We can
Okay.
take that out.
So could we omit everything in number 1 except that first sentence, which we just edited? And then I just have a question. Is there a reason we're omitting 8? I know we're a tobacco-free zone. Was the thought that that's redundant to have it because we are tobacco-free?
That, because we have it in 6. We moved it up to 6.
Perfect. All right. I did not see that. That is all I had for page 1. So as we move on to page 2, Board Member Schneider, do you have any adjustments for page 2?
I do not.
Okay, and this is not huge, so that's my disclaimer, but B, facilities use fees. Can we switch? Well, of course we can. Is there any objection to switching and making number 2 1 and number 1 2? It's just odd to me to have the header say facility use fees, and then immediately you start with facility use without a fee.
Yes.
All right, so number 2, our rental basis will be number 1, and then after that, we will have number 2, facility use without fee. As we're looking at number 2, so it's number 2, which is now 1, letter C. Rental fees for groups may be waived at the discretion of the executive director of business services or designee, or reduced up to 1/2 of the gross ticket receipt of the total charges before tax made for attendance. Is there a reason why that would happen?
There are times that we've waived fees, particularly if, let's say there is a community organization that is doing, let's say, a fundraiser, and they are going to be making a donation back to the school from that. So there are times where we would waive the fee so that it would not be a cost to them, knowing that there's going to be a donation back to the school district or the school in some way, shape, or form.
Are there, and I don't need you to list them or anything, but are there other scenarios where that would happen?
Yes, there have been other scenarios in which people made requests. Having read through the policies, there are people who have come up and said, hey, you know, we are an upstart, we're just looking for this X, Y, and Z. Would you make an exception and waive the fee for that? And so those case by case.
So here's my hesitation, because I am a fan of consistency. Are there any guidelines as to how that determination would be made? Just so we can make sure, like, I'm not opposed to it, but I just want us to be consistent.
Currently, those are the two scenarios that I've come across in which there's been conversations. And so the executive director has come and talked to me about each of these types of situations and whether I felt though we should do that. And to your point, my first question is, what have we done in the past for similar situations and similar type of organizations? Because like you, I do like the consistency.
Right.
And I would say more times than not, when it has been a nonprofit organization or an organization that is making a donation back to the school district, we've said yes to those types of situations. We have not had very many situations in which we've had very small organizations that are just looking for a space and things like that, but it has happened in the past.
So is making a donation back to the school a requirement to have a fee waived?
Not a requirement, but that's been the most common reason why we have waived fees. It's not the only reason.
Got it. Board Member Schneider, are you comfortable with that?
I am comfortable with that. Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. Wondering, though, if C should actually reside under facility use without a fee?
Well, the only thing is it can be reduced.
Right.
So there's still a fee. All right. I just wanted to ask. I'm fine.
Okay.
If that you're
I'm okay with it, yeah.
All right. 2D, help me. It's my understanding that a cash bond is like what you do when you need to bail someone out of jail. So I'm confused because 2D, thank you for nodding in confirmation. I appreciate that. 2D, the district may require a cash bond to ensure that a group will pay the rental fee in full. Did we mean to say cash deposit?
Deposit.
Okay. So yeah, let's change that from cash bond to cash deposit, please. All right, anything else on that page?
I have nothing.
All right, and then I don't have anything for the last page. Do you have anything,
I
Board
have
Member
nothing for
Schneider?
the last page.
All right, look at us. So if we look at the community use fee schedule, which is not a part of policy, but it was provided as a supplementary document. So if adjustments are made, this isn't going to impact the policy, but I just had some questions. And we discussed this in March, but I don't recall what the resolution was. So if we're looking at the right side at the top, building rental fees, all other buildings, the outdoor field or track, there's no charge. So theoretically, someone could have an outdoor concert, and that's free. Are we okay with that? Is there a reason there's no charge?
Typically, the field or track in and of itself is not, there's very little setup or takedown in that. So any of the other charges that come about with that, because it is outdoors, it's literally just unlocking the gate. Most of that comes in, the cost of that is in the service fees. So when you have custodial staff coming to clean up and so forth, that's the only reason that I've been given why it's no charge for the outdoor spaces. Doesn't have to be, it's what it was last time this was reviewed.
Okay. So the way I see it, we have a couple options. We could keep that at no fee, or we could say, depending on the activity, like if someone wants to do, and I'm completely making this up, like a walk for charity, and they want to use the track. I get it. But if someone wants to have an outdoor concert, that's different. That's wear and tear. That's a different situation. Are we comfortable with that remaining broad, just no charge? Or should it be dependent on the activity that is occurring, which if yes, leads us to how do we structure that so we're consistent?
Correct. You know, if we could leave it at no charge, but I would say it is close to, the outdoor track and field is closest to a gym, so I would make the recommendation that consistency-wise, we would put in lockstep with gym spaces. But anticipating of the conversation, that's also why we have the variable rate for theater staff, because when we have teaching staff come in, they are at a higher rate than our custodial or food service staff, which is why there isn't a dollar amount there.
Okay, so are we comfortable with having that be a $25 fee, knowing that we have that caveat where fees could be reduced if it's your walk versus
Yep.
your something else?
Yep.
We fine with
Because
that?
we
I'm
could
fine
do
with
that. We could do that just as easily if it was an outdoor track and it was going to rain that day and we moved into the Barkin because it was available. We could certainly waive the fee.
Perfect.
And likewise, to your concert scenario, please send us some tickets. There's going to be more wear and tear.
Right. So theater staff, so what I'm hearing you say is there is a different monetary rate for custodial staff versus teaching staff versus food staff.
Correct.
But we know what those rates are, right?
Well, they are typically tied to, yes, we do know what those rates are, but they're also tied to the experience of the teacher. So newer teacher, newer theater manager, lower on the salary schedule is going to be a lower cost than, say, someone who's more veteran.
So the salary schedule has a breakdown for an hourly rate.
It can be built in for an hourly rate, so yes, we could do that.
So could we refer to salary schedule?
Yeah, we could do
Okay.
that.
I just like to point people to something that's concrete and already established instead of, and I'm not comfortable with vagueness. All right. So instead of rate vary, it'll be referred to salary schedule.
Okay.
All right. So that takes us to policy 830, rule 2, which is our last policy for the evening. It's a 2-pager. Board Member Schneider, anything on that first page?
Yeah, under number 4, the third line, it's approved by the Executive Director of Business Services, comma, Food Services Director. Is it we're looking for both people need to sign off? Or it'd be,
So the food service director reports to the executive director of business services. So what it's basically saying is they're both looking at that at that time, because anything that will deal with a kitchen will fall under the purview of the food service director, and the executive director is making the ultimate authority.
okay, I would just recommend we put the word "and" in there.
Okay.
Agreed. And if we could also include or designee for Executive Director of Business Services.
Will do.
Anything else on that first page?
Nothing else on the first page.
Okay. I have a question about the next sentence. So if the event is a non-school activity and a waiver of rental fee is requested, usage shall be approved by the Board of Education prior to the event. So is there anything that makes that special because it's a non-school activity? So that's still like they would follow the application process, right?
I'm trying to see.
Yeah, so I'll reread it. So if the event is a non-school activity, so that would be an outside group requesting to use our facilities, so they would submit an application. So if it's a non-school activity and a waiver of rental fee is requested, usage shall also be approved by the Board of Education. So a couple questions. One, if it's a non-school activity, so it's an outside group that falls into one of those categories, they would all complete the application. So a couple things I just want to be clear on. is it that it's coming to the board because it's an outside group and they want a waiver of rental fee? Because I would think that that would be handled by the ED of Business Services, and then the board would have access if they want to bring anything up. But as a normal course of operation, I'm not sure why that automatically comes to the board.
I apologize. I'm not seeing where you are in the
No,
policy.
you're fine. I'm on that first page, 830 Rule
sorry.
2, number 4. So persons requesting kitchen facility, but it's like halfway through. So it says, if the event is a non-school activity and a waiver of rental fee is requested. So if you check both of those boxes, usage shall also be approved by the Board of Education prior to the event.
I agree with you. I think that should be the executive director of business services or designee.
So should we just omit that and, oh,
Yep.
yes?
What?
This policy just did not get updated when
Okay.
the other two did. If you look at the revised dates, this was adopted in 2014. The other ones were updated in 2018 with that change for the executive director to have that authority, and this one wasn't considered. So it probably was a case of the executive director at that time didn't even realize that that approval was in here
Okay,
and needed to be updated along with the other one.
perfect. So we can just omit that sentence.
Will do.
All right. Now, my lingering question from March 2nd, which goes along with the concert that's going to happen on the field for now, $25 an hour, not free. What about pop-up restaurants? So number 7, the food service director and executive director of business services may limit and restrict use of the equipment or prohibit use of certain items such as the slicer, steamer, convection oven, and walk-in freezer. Any such limitation shall be expressly set forth on the approved facility rental application. So it goes through all that stuff, but it doesn't prohibit like what it can be used for. So could I, in theory, rent out one of the school's trucks and I did my hold harmless and I got my certified person to handle the food, etc. Can I start a pop-up shop?
Based on the scenario that you just put forward, I don't see why it couldn't end up being a pop-up shop.
So here's my point. And that I want to acknowledge that that's probably extreme. But my point is, do we need to put any additional parameters on what can happen with our materials is the wrong word. Help me, Board Member Schneider.
Our resources.
With our, yeah, thank you. I can go with that. With our resources, or should we let it lie?
I think if we have a concern that something like a pop-up restaurant could occur, I think it's wise for us to put those caveats in there and say, for the benefit of the school or the community or something that would put limitations on that. Otherwise, if we think it's the most remote of, it's possible but highly improbable, we let it lie.
Yes, sir. Would you?
I just have a comment.
Yep.
Thanks. So in the city of Beloit, I don't know if you guys have noticed that the food truck industry is booming. So if we have an event at the high school or another school and we have our trucks there, is it in a policy that somebody just can't come and pull their truck up at our event and start selling food? That would be my question.
That's a good question. So yes, there would be. They can't just come to our event on our property and without working through us. So that would be like someone coming in and saying, "Hey, we want to provide the food for your event. What would we need to?" We would go through a policy like this.
Thank you for that, Mr. Winfield.
Thanks.
So legal opinion, do we need to include, okay, so one, do we need to include a non-compete clause in this do we have the ability to say, no, you can't pull up on 4th Street? Because that's not, is that considered our property? Like if they want to pull in this parking lot over here after a football game or a track meet, et cetera, do we have the legal ability to limit competition if our food truck is out there? Do you want to get back to, because this
Sorry,
policy
you're
would be the
muted,
place
Laura.
for it.
Sorry, you're muted, attorney.
Sorry, I had a baby screaming in the background a minute ago. I want to go with Dr. Keyser's comment that you do have the ability to control your premises, but I'm going to get back to you on it.
Okay.
I want to think about that and see if there's a better way we need to protect
Thank you. So 2 things I would like for you to follow up, and then board members, if you have additional things. One, is it prudent for us? We've put restrictions on certifications that have to be held in order to staff temporarily our kitchen or our food trucks, et cetera, but the use of it. And I think something would be reasonable, like we will weigh the benefit to the district and the community versus the benefit of personal gain when the ED of Business Services is approving applications. I think that's reasonable, but it might not be legal. So if you could check on that. And then 2, the whole idea of competing providers. 1, what is our authority in the proximity of our property? And then 2, is that a city thing that we need to loop in, or can we show them our policy and that's legally binding and enforceable?
Okay. I'll get back to you on that.
All right, thank you so much. And so that brings us to the last page of our last policy. Board Member Schneider, do you have anything?
And I can't remember if we mentioned this before, but the very last line, between the food service director and the FSMC.
So we have
The food service manager company?
Okay, let's just spell it out.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, it's spelled out. That was something that was added. But in my note, I said, who is this? Who is the food service management company? Is that like Airmark?
That's Airmark.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Anything else, Board Member Schneider?
Nothing else.
Okay, so if we briefly go back to 2F, so under responsibilities of the individual or group requesting use, pay the per hour fee in accordance with board policy and the certified food service manager. To my knowledge, we don't have board policy that specifically address what people should be paid who are working with food services. Did I miss something?
We can, so in the exhibit, we have the food service staff at, I think it was 20.
So I see cafeteria and kitchen at 25.
Correct.
Is that what this is referring to?
Our Rule 1 Exhibit 1, the fee schedule has food service staff at $25 an hour.
Okay, so can we, because help me, technically I don't think that's a part of policy. It's kind of like an addendum, an attachment. So could we clear that up and say pay the per hour fee in accordance, instead of board policy, with the community use fee schedule?
Sure.
All right. And then if we can just make sure that the community use fee schedule is cross-referenced in policy, but where will that live? That showed up as an attachment in board docs, but since it's not technically a part of the policy, where does that reside?
We can put that in the administrative regulations side of the board doc, so it'll be just a drop-down parallel to the policies.
So Ms. Shope, when that's cross-referenced, would that be a clickable link? Yes. Perfect.
It's also out on the website under all the rental stuff,
Okay.
which has its own page
Perfect.
under business services.
All right, so in summary, 2F will be pay the per hour fee in accordance with the community use fee schedule. Well, okay, now it says for the certified food service manager, but that specific role, they have food service staff. I would think that the food service manager would be at a different rate than the staff. Is that accurate?
That would be accurate, and we'll add that onto
Okay.
the schedule.
Just writing myself a note. Okay, so at the end, okay, so we took care of that. So when it says, it's still under 2F, that second sentence, use of the kitchen for after-school enrichment programs, is that for school-sponsored or for, is there a case where a non-school, well, yeah, if someone, thank you for your patience. I'm processing as I'm talking, which is generally not a good idea. All right, so after-school enrichment programs, all of those are school-sponsored. So it's included in that without being, so, okay, perfect. And then if we could just add or designee to the last sentence in F, Executive Director of Business Services or designee for consistency. Okay, under catering, an individual or group may use the services of the food service staff to provide, prepare, cook, and serve food in the dining area or other area of the school. Is there a reason that the kitchen isn't included? Yes, you are shaking your head yes. Please unmute.
Go for it. Sounds good.
My understanding is that, oh no, that doesn't answer your question. I was going to say, my understanding is that only Aramark staff can be in the kitchens. Like, years ago, we used to be able to go in and use kitchens.
Yes.
Like for band boosters, we used to go in and make spaghetti dinners and stuff.
Yep.
But now only Aramark staff can use the kitchens. That's, you're saying
That
no,
used to
that's
be
not
the
true
case, but I am encouraged by Dr. Kieser shaking his head. Have our kitchens been emancipated?
We have Airmark staff there to assist, but the kitchens are spaces that can be rented out as part of that.
So here's the thing. It feels kind of weird to me. It's our kitchen, but we need Aramark staff to hold our hand to use our kitchen. So, which leads me to my question. So my note under that first sentence under catering, can an outside individual or group with proper credentials, because you don't want anybody in your kitchen, but if they have proper credentials, can't we replace them or substitute them for Aramark staff and use the kitchen using proper protocols, et cetera?
It comes down to a level of liability that the board's comfortable with.
Okay.
Airmark holds the food service license. However, we have the liability. So with an Airmark staff member there on site, they may assist an organization using the kitchen to serve the band booster, lunch, and so on. However, if someone gets sick from that event and we assume the liability, they can come back on us. So that's why we put in there that Airmark should be there. We could say that someone else with that credentials, and they could demonstrate that they have those credentials, but that doesn't alleviate us from the liability. So that's why we say it should be one of our staff who are in there. So it's managing that risk that we want to assume.
But we have the liability if Aramark's doing it and they're credentialed if someone else credentialed came in lieu of Aramark, we still had that same liability concern, correct?
Correct, but because they don't assume that liability, even though they have the credentials, Airmark is obligated because of our working relationship and contract that they've got something to lose if they allow for something unsanitary to happen. That isn't to say that someone who has those credentials would allow that to happen. They're just not our employee, so we don't have any recourse against, like, what did you do? We followed all the proper food service protocols. When we ask that of our Airmark staff, we know that there's something else on the line there. And that isn't to say that a person who has those credentials would do something under the table, but that managed risk is really the rationale and reason for having Airmark staff present instead of just someone who has those credentials.
No, that makes sense. Thank you for that explanation. So my remaining question is, so if we have an individual or group who's using the food staff service, which is Aramark, why can't they be in the kitchen? Because this lists everything but. It's like dining area or other area of the school. Is there a reason why kitchen isn't included if we have the person from Aramark there assisting?
And that's what I'm saying is that it may have been that a spot that was available and then not available, but with our food service manager that we've hired as of last year, we are now opening up those spaces. So I don't know why we could include kitchens in there if we wanted to, because as long as we have Airmark staff available to help assist, we would be able to have those spaces available at this point.
Perfect. So I would propose that we include, so cook and serve food in the kitchen, dining area or other area of the school. And I'm just going to assume that other area of the school is specific to serve and people are not, I'll leave it, let it lie. Amy. Board Member Schneider, do you have any adjustments or additional thoughts under the catering section?
No, I do not.
Okay. If we could add or designee to the last sentence, food service director or designee, or because of the credentials, does it always have to be the food service director?
Food service director will be the most knowledgeable for those pieces.
Okay. So we will leave that as is. And just a question. So no outside food will be allowed unless there is an agreement. So is there and again, for consistency, is there a rationale for what's in and what's out?
It's really the conversation. So this is a story that was shared with me. I don't know if it happened here, if it happened in some other entity, but there was an event that happened in a year, and the following year they wanted to host that event again, and the entity said, well, we had this food from last year, we're just going to mix it in with the food for this year and serve it. That's the reason why we have the conversation to say, what food are you bringing in and what's been the preparation, so we can, again, stave off anything that could increase our liability and our risk.
Okay, so that makes sense. Thank you for expounding on that. So, which leads me to, I think, my final question. Are there nutrition requirements that would get approval or not get approval for outside food that's coming in? Is that one of the restrictions, not just expiration date?
That's a great question. So our participation in the National School Lunch Program expires 30 minutes after the close of school. So most after-school events would be exempt from any nutritional requirements.
All right. Side note, completely unrelated. I'm old enough to remember when we could, at Beloit Memorial High School, go in the basement and purchase as many Otis Meyer, Spunkmeyer cookies as we wanted before school start, because I used to eat them in calculus class. All right. Unless there is anything else for the 8:30 set of policies, do we want to hold, because there are a few things that our attorney for policy is going to follow up on. Board Member Schneider, what is your preference?
I think we should hold the 8:30 series until we have the answers.
Okay, but when we meet in June, it's going to be very brief for 8:30. So just to recap, you will follow up on the non-compete. And then also if it would be prudent for any additional restrictions balancing school and community needs versus personal gain.
Yeah. And just so I'm clear, both of those questions primarily related to the food truck situation?
Food truck or facilities,
Both, okay.
please. The non-compete, more the food trucks.
Understood.
But if we need to add additional restrictions, that would be the food trucks or the facilities.
Okay.
All right, so we've done good work. Thank you, everyone. That brings us to 3A. Our next meeting date for the policy committee will be Wednesday, June 1st, right here in Keck Boardroom at 5:30. Is there a motion for adjournment?
I so move.
All right, I will provide a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, that motion passes unanimously. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
You have been removed from the call. Goodbye.